I'd also like to introduce actually first, let's do a quick housekeeping rules. They're going to be very similar for the next few sessions, but this is the first one. So please stay muted and off your video, except for the speakers, and the speakers only when you're about to speak. Please put any chats or questions into the chat function, and I'll try and get to them after each speaker. Could be a bit of a problem when I'm speaking myself, but I'll do my best. The speakers, please share your screen after whilst I am giving a little bit of an intro to each of your talks. Just hop on, share your screen, start up your presentation, and hopefully we won't have too many technical difficulties. And we're not going to have breakout rooms in this session, and I hope all of you are on the latest version of Zoom. You must be, otherwise you wouldn't be in this room, I think. And I hope all of you are okay with being recorded as well. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our 6 speakers. I will kick us off with a little bit of an introduction of a in-depth literature review that we did on characterizing hard-to-reach energy users. And now I'm hoping I'm pronouncing everyone's names right. Minyoung Kwon is going to talk about stimulating homeowner energy-saving behaviours through local authorities' actions. Stephen März will be talking about tenants' willingness to pay for energy efficiency. Dr. Kimberley O'Sullivan is my co-national expert for the hard-to-reach energy users tasked by the user TCP by IEA, and she will be talking about COVID impacts from research in the participating countries. I think most of you will probably know Paolo Bertoldi. He will be talking about sufficiency specifically, and then we have Stratos Keranidis, and he will be talking about a special nudge project. And I'm going to start us off with my own presentation and try and be good and stick to the 10 minutes. So during our lockdown in New Zealand, which even though it only lasted for 6 weeks, somehow we managed to accidentally write a book, which was just meant to be a literature review, but then it blew out and became a beast. Up front, I just want to say very quickly that the users TCP is functionally and legally autonomous from the IEA Secretariat in Paris. And we decided to focus on hard-to-reach energy users after having done an international research collaboration on behaviour change and demand-side management for the users TCP for 8 years, and realised that a very large group of energy users was not really very well engaged or targeted with the energy efficiency and behaviour change programs that most of the countries that we're working with were using. And our definition of hard-to-reach energy users is very broad. We know that. We know that it is probably too broad to be useful for policymakers who want to target specific audiences, but we kept it this broad because we wanted to capture all hard-to-reach audiences, including those not usually regarded as such as high-income energy users or building operators in commercial office buildings. And our literature review has really shown us that there is a much wider range of energy users that could be regarded as hard to reach than is originally thought. Our shared goal is to identify, define, and prioritize hard to reach audiences and share effective strategies between our countries. One of the most important goals, shared goals by our different countries in this Venn diagram is equity considerations and energy justice considerations, which are obviously very important. Our participants and collaborators found across the world. We have 3 financially participating countries: the US, Sweden, and New Zealand, and the UK and Canada are also contributing a lot in kind. And then there's a bunch of other countries that are helping us with case studies, etc. We follow a research process that we have co-created with our project partners in the US, the Sea Change Institute, and we call it the ABCDE Building Blocks of Behavior Change. It's a mixture of design thinking and very robust social science methodology. And the steps that we're going to validate it and test it in the field and field research pilots. And the steps I'm talking about today with regards to this literature review were the discover and define phases and really targeting hard to reach audiences and specific energy saving behaviors. So we call it the beast because it turned into a bit of a beast. Here is the publication. We are currently updating it with the latest COVID stats because we realized that obviously a lot of these numbers have changed in the last 6 months since we finalized the last draft, and we will hopefully be publishing it as an ebook very soon. So the reason why we undertook this big literature review is because we wanted to identify priority hard to reach audiences that were highlighted by our project partners and participating countries. I've given a link to our hard to reach characterization that outlines this below. We'll be talking about that in a special session on Friday on the hard to reach task. We wanted to describe and characterize these audiences much more in depth based on the literature, understand the wider context and dimensions, identify very specific target energy saving behaviors, also estimate the size of these audiences, and got a bit of a shock there, and undertake a gap analysis of the research. And just some numbers, it took us a good 6 months to write it. It has 9 chapters, 10 co-authors, over 250 pages. There are over 1,000 publications that we reviewed, and it's got over 131,000 words. So it is indeed a bit of a beast. We used a full integrative narrative literature review methodology as described by Picasso, and we based it also on stakeholder interviews, surveys we've done with hard to reach experts around the world, outreach to our networks, and then a very in-depth keyword and forward and backward search. So here is the scope. We started with a broad introduction to the task and the motivations behind the IEA supporting it and the users TCP supporting it. We then went into the methodology of the literature review and very in depth into definitions because there's a lot to be said about the different HDR definitions. There's also a glossary we put in there. And then we had several audience chapters. The largest one was vulnerable households. We also looked at high-income households because the Swedish participants are very interested in that. There's an overarching sectoral chapter on renters and landlords, which was the second largest one. We looked at various commercial sectors, really nutted into small to medium enterprises, and then did a gap analysis across them, and finally provided some conclusions and recommendations. Some major findings. The term is very commonly used, hard to reach, in and out of the energy sector. It's rarely very clearly defined. There are a lot of critiques about the terminology. You can see some of them here. There are many alternative but often overlapping definitions. When you look at them, you can see that we need to take more care around keeping any value judgment out of these definitions, and kind of this puts the onus on the hard to reach energy users themselves, it being their fault or why they're hard to reach or engage. And there are better terms that kind of mean similar things, but put the onus more on the behavior changers, as we call them, who are trying to change these people's behaviors. And some of the terminology actually refers to the homes rather than the households, but there is a lot of overlap, and hard to reach or hard to treat or heat homes are usually also have hard to reach householders in them. What's really important is that we need to consider the wider context and factors that actually make these groups hard to reach, particularly their barriers. So vulnerable households is what most people think of when we're talking about hard to reach energy users, particularly using low income as a target metric. What needs to be said is that this is actually too simplistic, because not all low-income households are hard to reach. In fact, they're usually a lot easier to reach than other vulnerable households. There's a lot of programs specifically targeting low-income And it's much more important that we look at the various intersectionalities between compounding vulnerabilities, because the more of them there are, the harder to reach they get. There are different terminologies around energy burden, hardship, insecurity, precariousness. There is a different definitions around energy versus fuel poverty, and then also it's important to distinguish between energy inequality, equity, or energy injustice. And also I want to say there is an ENR session tomorrow that I'll be going in much more detail into the issues around terminologies of vulnerable households there. High income households are obviously some of the highest using households. The statistics are usually based around, income qualifiers, economic statistics. There's not much research done on them. Landlords and tenants were the second largest group, especially because there are in both the residential and commercial sectors generally a difference between how renters use energy, particularly multifamily apartments. They still account for a large percentage of energy use, and they are hard to reach because they're actually a majority of people using buildings both commercially and in residential sector are renters. The split incentive issue is generally described as one of the biggest barriers to overcome. And it needs to be acknowledged that both the landlords and the renters are very hard to reach, but they have different barriers and you need different methods of engaging them. And then the commercial sector, we found some really big research gaps. My colleague Matt Chester from the Sea Change Institute is going to talk about that in session 2B later on today. And SMEs, because they make up the vast majority of businesses in the world, are regarded generally as the hardest to reach, and there's some of the least research on them. And obviously, these are also groups, and those businesses are particularly badly hit by COVID impacts. So some key findings were that the literature focuses mostly on low-income households and renters, but the hard-to-reach audiences with the greatest energy-saving potential are probably high-income households, landlords, and building operators of commercial buildings. The least research are small businesses and the commercial sector outside of office buildings, because they often get conflated, and Matt will talk about that. We found that it's way more than a third of energy users like we originally hypothesized. It's probably more like 2/3, if not 3/4 of all energy users that would fall into a hard-to-reach category. The COVID-19 impact has made that group even bigger, had a huge impact, particularly on the most vulnerable households, on renters and small businesses. And there are a lot of research gaps, particularly around looking at multiple benefits, getting certain demographic data, collecting psychographics, and undertaking not just barrier but need assessments as well. And we need to acknowledge that they are not just hard to reach, they're also underserved and under-researched. And we need to put much more focus on energy justice, on inequity, and also on the role of stigma, which are key themes that are just not addressed enough right now in the research. And so I'd like to keep us with this and open up and check if anyone asked any questions in the chat. I can't see any. So I'm wondering if I should just ask myself some questions, but that's kind of weird. Anyone got any questions? Otherwise, I may just go on to the next speaker and save us a little bit of time in case we're running over. Here are our national expert contacts in case you want to contact any of us. Okay, I am going to go out of screen sharing and I'm going to introduce Dr. Minyoung Kwon. Oh,
sorry,
I have one question.
Yeah, you do have a question there now.
Sorry, just saw it. Do you think the hard to reach can also differ according with the objective of reaching them? Yes, Miguel, thank you. Absolutely. I think that makes a big difference what your actual objective is. One of the big problems that we found is that most behavior changes start with engagement strategies, but haven't actually undertaken enough research into clearly identifying the audience characteristics and hopefully including audience representative or at least trusted intermediaries or middle actors who work with them to actually help identify them better. So yes, I think that definitely makes a difference and should be done something that we have in our research process in that discovery stage, where we're actually looking at the shared objectives of the different stakeholders and try to bring them all together. And Paolo also said that renters have, actually, that is not necessarily the case, particularly also because they often live in multifamily apartments. And even though they may be lower efficiency, they're usually also smaller and have, because of the shared walls, etc., there's actually some shared thermal spacing, some shared heating use, etc. So from the literature, it did look like in general, and that's general of course, that renters usually use less energy, but there's obviously always exceptions. And the second question is, what is the relation between hard to reach and energy poor households? Paolo, that is a brilliant question that I'm going to go into much more detail tomorrow at the ENR session 4C, where I have 20 minutes to actually talk just about those differences in the different definitions. A low income or energy poor household is not necessarily hard to reach. In fact, if there are specific programs targeting them, they are probably easier to reach. However, there may be other barriers like competing life priorities or mistrust in authorities that make them harder to reach again. But hard to reach in energy poor or low income is not the same thing. Neither is hard to reach in vulnerable households. Cool. Thank you for those questions. And I'm now going to introduce someone else. Yes, I will once again talk much more about that, Karen, tomorrow in the session 4C by ENR at 10:30 in the morning. I hope you can join us. And also on Friday, session 8B, we'll go into much more detail on the hard to reach task. So you can watch those and hear a lot more about it. I don't want to cut too much into the other speakers right now. But thank you so much for these questions. They were excellent. Also, please try and put them through maybe during the talk when they come up in your heads next time, so we don't have to wait too long after them. Yes, the link is in the, Laura, the link is in the slides, which will be up in the, on the website soon. Cool. All right. Minyoung Kwon, please share your screen, put your video on. She's a postdoctor in the Department of Management in the Built Environment at Delft University of Technology. Her work focuses on user-centered design and planning and its impact on the building design process. And currently she works on a project called AAA, stimulating the adoption of low-carbon technologies by homeowners through increased awareness and easy access. Thank you so much, Minyoung, and I will shut up now. Keep going.
Yeah, thank you for an introduction. My name is Minyoung Kwon, and for this presentation, we have a contribution from Dirk from University of Ghent, Belgium, and Erwin from TU Delft. And thanks for it. Today I would like to talk about the local authorities' behavior change to stimulate the homeowners' energy-saving behavior. So first, introduce the background of the AAA project and the aim of this project and strategic approach and conclusions. We have 7 local authorities as a project partner from 4 countries in Europe. And again, TU University and TU Delft are participating in this project as academic partners. And AAA is financially, most of them financially by European Union and co-funded by South Holland and West Flanders. As we all know, there are some goals in home renovation, such as retrofitting these existing houses, especially built before 1970, into highly energy efficient and comfort houses, and also increasing this rate to 3% by 2030. And promoting equal access to financial aid to homeowners while ensuring affordability. And as a local authorities, they are trusted mediating facilitators, and they can use certain actions, a localized and decentralized approach to increase renovation rate. And also the implementing policies for household energy efficiency for the local level. And there are some challenges. They often use a traditional approach, which is often organized centrally with a top-down approach, such as energy performance certificate and financial incentives. However, we try to do some bottom-up approach and more easily contact the homeowners locally. And also another challenge is realizing more involvement of third parties and SMEs to public procurement with more cooperation. So our research question is, how can local authorities better stimulate homeowners to adopt low carbon technologies? So instead of we focus on more homeowners' behavior change, we try to deal with or tackle through local authorities' behavior change. The aim of AAA is to increase awareness and easy access for homeowners. We had 4 themes and activities, which are modular web portal, pop-up center, and disseminating HEMS and demonstration exemplars. But today I will focus on first 2 topics. And we use the strategy approach for engagement of local authorities. And first is developing co-creation and collaboration and considering homeowner renovation journey and developing communication and organization skills for local authorities and sustaining their actions which lead to homeowner adoption in the end. For the collaboration, local authorities approached and collaborated with 3 main actor groups, public, civil, and private actors. And underneath, you can see which type of stakeholders they collaborated together to create these activities and pop center and modular web portal. And local authorities had to keep in mind this homeowner renovation journey model, which is similar like a customer journey model from awareness to acknowledgement. But we thought it's closed loop instead of a linear connection because, for example, the homeowners who already experienced the renovation for their home, and then they can give an influence to the other homeowners or neighbors through peer-to-peer communication. So each stages, local authorities provide a different information to lead the next stage for homeowners. And third one is that specifically local authorities try to invite civic actors for local, such as local ambassadors and neighborhood committees, so they can easily approach the homeowners or citizens. They also need some communication expert because local authorities aren't expertise for marketing or promotion. So they need some tips from communication expert. And at the same time, for the pop-up center, local authorities develop 2 different types. It's a mobile pop-up, as you can see on the upper part of this slide. And then down, you can see the fixed location pop-up center in the vacant shops in the shopping mall or their offices. So they could provide more personalized information and a certain coaching and advice at the same time advertising these renovation measures. Especially the thermographic photos, people are really interested in the thermographic photos because then they could see their roof insulation, how well their roof is insulated. And the last one, the strategy was sustaining their actions. And so we traced the unique number of visitors to their website, at the same time the web modules. So as you can see here, when local authorities take a certain actions, you can see the peak of the unique number of visitors in their web portal, which means that people are willing to search some renovation techniques or measures. At the same time, for the pop-up center, we also collected quantitative data, such as number of visitors and number of registered person and opening hours. So we could see the effectiveness of each pop-up centers. And we also wanted to figure out what are the reasons why some of them are more effective and the other ones are not. And the last principle was we also consider and then apply the business model development canvas. So actually we use this one, the first stage, to create a pop-up centers, but also local authorities perceive that we really need to keep this one even during the operation stage to provide us proper information to homeowners. So to wrap it up, this presentation, and cooperating with citizen organization or other local authorities can allow a better targeting of audiences, and personalize the coaching and information can attract people to homeowners or home renovation. And combining not only is just promoting through website, but also a virtual and physical consultancy increase the engagement of homeowners. And local authorities need to keep sustaining their actions and evaluating the impact internally. And they also need to consider the home renovation journey so they can provide a proper information in the certain stages. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Minyoung. You were right on time, which is incredible. How have we got any questions for Minyoung? Please put them into the chat now. I certainly have one to start us off. What would you see as the differences in behavioral approaches between smaller and larger authorities?
Oh, well, yeah, we observed some differences between larger and small local authorities in especially the preparation and collaboration process, because because of the size of the local authorities, there is a certain limitation in terms of the funding, and but also how they can reach the other local authorities. So bigger one was easier to invite other neighboring local authorities to work together, but at the same time, the small ones are hard to reach. But they also need to really collaborate with others. Also, sometimes they need the national government. They need some help from the national level. Then they can share the medium or smaller size of the local authority can share their information.
Good. And Laura asks, what, if any, support local authorities want from the national agency, and I assume National Energy Agency?
Because local authorities are sometimes not really expertise in terms of energy, energy saving, and then some technologies. But in this way, the energy agencies can give advice and which direction they should do, and then what kind of information the local energy agencies also can offer to local authorities.
And Kurt says, great presentation. Any ideas on costs of the mobile pop-up centers?
Oh yeah, we collected the cost structure and then the evaluation, but yeah, I didn't include this one for that. That it really vary, of course, when they rent a long-term fixed location and cost also more money, and at the same time, it depends on what kind of promotion activities they want to do. For example, local authorities inform us the thermographic photos that costs a lot of money to prepare, but then it can be compensated by other fundings. People are more interested to see the thermographic photos, so it was worth it to invest the amount of money in the end.
Great. What would you recommend for better evaluation of resident behaviour with these policy instruments?
To be honest, it could have been interesting if we distribute a certain surveys, and then are they willing to adopt certain low carbon technologies or energy home renovation measures, but it couldn't do that because of the privacy and certain limitations. So if we really want to do their homeowners' behavior change, the best way to do it is just in the pop-up center or when they visit the website, and then it should be somehow connected to the survey.
Great. Thank you. And Matthias also says, thank you for your excellent presentation. Is there any condition for this kind of strategy to succeed? Type of urban area, size of village, etc.?
Well, what does it exactly mean? So like a certain strategy for?
Like, do you need? Does it need to be in a city, or is like any kind of size of settlement? And you also do it in small villages.
Yes. We had 3 different types of local authorities, and then smaller and medium size, and then regional, even regional scale. For example, Picardy in France. So there's a really bigger scale. Then instead, they want to focus on more village and outskirt side. So the strategic way, I think it can be available for different size of local authorities.
Great. Thank you so much, Minyoung. That was a really great presentation. I wish you could hear us all clap, but unfortunately we can't do that. So thank you so much. And I have now the pleasure to introduce Dr. Kimberley O'Sullivan, my co-national expert in New Zealand, my co-liver in the future at 9 o'clock at night. She is a senior research fellow at He Kainga Oranga, the Housing and Health Research Program, and her research explores the relationships between energy poverty, or fuel poverty as they call it in the UK, energy use behaviours, energy efficiency of housing and buildings, and the important interactions of those with health. And Kim will talk about our research, which is going to be also published in the IEECP summer study this year, on what extent COVID-19 has impacted hard-to-reach energy users. And again, please don't forget to write your questions in the chat. Keep going, and please turn on your video, Kim.
Okay, great. So to get started, as he said, thank you for the introduction. We did a bit of work during our various lockdowns, and the countries involved in the hard-to-reach task have all been working on their own research. So this was, I'm just having a bit of, there we are. At the same time, obviously, we started doing our own research into COVID-19 and the impacts in our own countries, and we also started to work together on looking at whether we could draw some conclusions about this for the Hard to Reach project. So basically, we were looking at whether there were some intersections of what the challenges that COVID-19 has brought to us, but also whether there are some opportunities. So as he said, we were kind of in the middle of the year 1 task in writing the literature review when COVID kind of came into being and created a bit of a speed bump for us. But this has enabled us to draw some initial insights that we've now integrated with the literature review findings. So just to talk briefly about how the different countries reacted initially. So going back to about this time last year, New Zealand had the most stringent lockdown, followed by the UK, the US, and then Sweden. And now we have 1 year on, New Zealand is relatively unlocked, apart from the border. Sorry, we can't have you coming to visit us right now, and we can't basically get out either. And now we have some shift in lockdown in other areas as well. So that's something to keep in mind when we think about the different impacts that COVID has had in different countries. So I'm going to race through a little bit of the results from the different countries. So Sweden, our colleague Luis Manduca at Lund has been looking at mostly the transport side of things. So this is an audience that is identified as a specific hard-to-reach audience of interest in Sweden. So this data came from transport authorities as well as a survey of transport modal shifts. So what we can see here is that there were obviously quite some changes in Sweden during that March to December 2020 period. And the main kind of take-homes for that was that working from home actually works. Surprise. We can actually reduce our transport if we want to. We did have that modal shift going to active transport, but we do need to be a little bit careful and think about what might happen with bounce back as well, and whether there is a shift away from public transport use into private vehicles as well. And that the local authorities are key drivers, and that behavioural science interventions such as the huge COVID road bump there for everybody does actually work for transport policy as well. Moving on now to the United States, so our colleagues there mostly focus on low-income consumers, and they also undertook a survey and focus group with a subset of those survey respondents there. So the most common changes that they found there was that energy use increased, surprise, surprise, when we are all at home, with more family members working from home. They did have about 15% postponed a bill as well. And they also had roughly the same number were also purchasing smart home equipment during this time. There was a bit more contact with utilities, and people, when they were contacting utilities, were using a new contact method. I'm just going to check the chat there. Right, so looking at the bill postponement, we can see that those people that were postponing their bills, more likely to be female and white, with less than bachelor's degree and low income. Also homeowners, which I was surprised about rather than renters, there as well. For the focus groups, 63% of the respondents gave positive assessments of the COVID-19 support that was offered by their utilities. But some of the higher income respondents mentioned that there was an unnecessary COVID-19 email overload from the utilities. Shifting across to the United Kingdom now, where our colleagues Amy Ambrose, led by Amy Ambrose, undertook a review of COVID-19 policy measures. And they also re-interviewed some households that they had previously interviewed in 2017. So the main things that really came out from these interviews were the loss of the third spaces for households and not being able to leave the house when they were energy poor to warm up was quite difficult for people. Sorry, I think I'm missing a slide. No, okay. So moving on to New Zealand, the data on the energy impacts from COVID-19 for our New Zealand households came through 3 online surveys that we undertook and interviews. Obviously, our lockdown was much shorter, so we've already experienced that shift where we have had the lockdown, and then we've had a significant period post-lockdown as well. So we're starting to see what kind of persistence, I guess, of habit change there might have been after that. We found that the disconnection was more prevalent in the low-income households, and among those who lost their job because of COVID-19, about 14% said that they always had the heat or eat dilemma. And again, that third sector space really came through, the loss of the third sector space. So this quote comes from a woman who was telling me about how she used to shower at the pool to shift some of her costs, and she noticed that the extra hot water use when she wasn't able to use the pool, that was quite noticeable for her. She's also now out of lockdown, but has started working from home and is now self-employed. So there's been some quite big shifts for those people who have had their jobs change or had their hours reduced. So when we look across, sorry, I think we're skipping, nope. I also just want to mention that we had a survey of tertiary students in New Zealand as well that are mostly in multiple occupancy private sector housing. And we were quite concerned when we got the results back from the student surveys as well, because this is a group who are quite hard to reach, and they also have experienced quite a lot of job loss here. And they talked quite a lot about the mental strain and hadn't had government support rolled out to them. Besides the extension of the student loan scheme, they were able to borrow a bit more. And a lot of them said that they had used that for their energy use or to contribute to their energy payments. So when we draw this all together, we think there are three really key findings. So the first one is about who does the research on hard-to-reach energy users across the different countries. Usually in the US, this is utilities and third-party EE implementers. In Sweden and New Zealand, we have dedicated government agencies and academia with a lesser onus on utilities. And in the UK, it's a more kind of joined-up cross-sector collaboration across government, utilities, and also charities as well, and academics. And when we look at which hard-to-reach energy users are regarded as high priority for the different countries, the US, the UK, and New Zealand focus really is on the vulnerable households. In New Zealand, we've gone down the route of targeting for specific groups within that group that are energy poor. In Sweden, that has the lowest rate of energy poverty across the countries involved, they are more concerned with the higher income consumers and the transport related activities and emissions of those hard to reach consumers. When we think about how we might collect data on hard to reach energy users, we want to again stress that it's really important that we are collecting both demographic and psychographic data, and that will help with the implementation and reaching the hard to reach energy users in future. And I also just want to acknowledge my co-authors, so the esteemed C and also Amy Ambrose in the UK and her team there, Lewis Mandaka, and I've also got some colleagues working with me here, Helen Biggers and Isabel Harris-Clark, and we have our colleagues Beth and Hale Forster at the Sea Change Institute in the US. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Kim, and thanks for staying in the 10 minutes. And I'm sorry I took some of the slides out. That was my fault why they were missing. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Kim around this paper on COVID-19 impacts around different countries? Or does anyone want to put in some of your own experiences if you have researched the hard to reach and impact of COVID-19 on them in your countries? One question I have, Kim, and it's probably a bit mean coming from me, who's leading this task and who's leading you down into oblivion, and Louise as well, who's here, is do you think that cross-country comparisons like this are actually useful?
Useful in what way? Useful for academic interest, sure.
Yeah.
No, but I do think that there are things that we can learn from each other, different ways that we are maybe not just conducting the research, but also different ways that we are trying to reach the hard to reach. And I see, Lars, you've asked me a question more about methods and how do we measure energy use, and I think that's something that certainly New Zealand is trying to learn more from the UK about how to do that, in different ways of, I guess, thinking about how we can measure and what audiences we should be looking at. So yeah, I do think it is worthwhile. Obviously, it's a little bit tricky, and something like COVID-19 throws just a huge curveball to everybody, but also in the way that the governance has been undertaken very differently, obviously, in minor seas country versus other countries that are perhaps more joined up. So yeah, I think it is useful to do these kind of projects.
Mm-hmm. And Paolo asked a question, which I think we have seen as well, which is that energy consumption has increased, obviously, because there's much more working from home, but then it was probably compensated by reduction in transport and office space energy consumption. However, I guess particularly when you look at, sorry, I'm answering this for you, but like I'm just thinking when you look at the more vulnerable households probably suffer more from the increase in residential energy use. Have you seen any numbers there?
So my colleague Helen and I are still trying to work out on, and this kind of goes back to the how do we measure the energy use. We're asking the electricity usage data for some of the people that were in one of our surveys, so we'll have that more in-depth information about actual consumption data. That should help us to maybe unlock some more things as well. In that survey, we also asked people kind of how did they shift their energy use? What things did they change? Did they do their cooking, or did they change their wake up or go to sleep routines, those kind of things? So that should give us a little more information about what happens when everybody is working from home and whether there are those kind of time of use shifts as well happening. So yeah, we did have kind of broadly energy consumption at home went up a little bit, but yes, in New Zealand there was that big reduction in energy use overall, I think, from office and commercial buildings closing. Yeah, in terms of, I guess, in New Zealand too, maybe we have advanced a little bit and we have that kind of bounced back has happened. As far as we can see, our initial findings are that people will only keep those changes that really fit with the lifestyle. So when the lifestyle goes back to everybody back at work and back in offices and children doing their after school things, then we see a kind of shift back to that normal before COVID energy use. So I think that's something to keep in mind too.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Laura asks if you've done any work on the different support put in place to support hard-to-reach audiences and how effective these were. It's a very good question, Laura.
So probably the thing that I know most about is that in New Zealand we have a winter energy payment, and our lockdown happened kind of in the beginning of autumn, and we weren't sure at that point how long we would be locked down for. So one of the immediate things that the government did was to double that winter energy payment that goes out automatically to everybody who is over 65, and then also to people who are on a range of government support payments. So that was effective, we believe, and we've done some more interviews with those people who were hard to reach and were receiving that payment, and it was very well received and very helpful for them. So I think that kind of just getting money to people who are really energy poor and who are stuck at home is a really sensible thing to do.
Yeah, and the UK, especially Amy, has done quite a bit of research into the background of that. And our literature review, even though it didn't focus on engagement strategies at all, we did actually see quite a few different approaches, obviously, particularly in those 4 countries, including on the support that was offered and then the impact that had on how large the audience size grew in terms of how many people were affected. So that was definitely shown as well. Thanks, Kim. Kia ora. And well done. I'm giving you a clap too, so you get at least one clap. I know many more people would clap too. And I would like to now introduce Paolo. Not that I think we need to introduce him, but Paolo is a senior expert in sustainable energy, climate change, and energy efficiency at the European Commission, where he served as the energy efficiency expert and senior expert for a total of 26 years. And he's also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Energy Efficiency and has a demonstrated history of working in international affairs. Paolo, can you share your screen, please? Brilliant. Please start us off, and again, try and ask questions during the talk as they come up. Thank you.
Okay, so basically I'm going to present to you what in my view are the needs in terms of energy efficiency policy or energy saving policy to reach the climate targets that at least in Europe we have. So we have a recent announcement that the EU will be climate neutral by 2050, and we are also committed to reduce our emission by 55% by 2030 compared to 1990. Energy efficiency has been a priority since the last 20 years. We have also a modern energy efficiency first, but if you look at the consumption trends, after the decline in economy from 2010 to 2013, after that the consumption started to grow and now it's flat in 2018, 2019, so we are not decreasing as fast as needed. And in particular, we have already a 2030 efficiency target of 32.5%, which is already difficult to reach, which needs to be updated most probably around 36, 37%. So we need to deploy many more policy, in particular to getting our citizen and our business to move away just from investing in efficiency, but to look also at the energy conservation. So we all know what is energy efficiency is mainly technology change where it allows to keep an energy service constant, heating, cooling, lighting, and with reduced energy input. Energy conservation maybe is a reduction of the service, is the way I define. So we have less service. For example, we don't need cool in summer or don't need in the winter as we were doing before. Maybe the thermostat goes from 21 to 20 degree to 19 degree. We wear a jumper in winter, and in this way we reduce the input energy. And of course, there is many situations, a combination of both. In addition, there is also the new concept of sufficiency. And I like this definition by Sachs as saying, while efficiency is doing the thing right, sufficiency is about doing the right things. So basically, with the idea of a stringent carbon target, climate neutrality, with the combination with the sustainable development goals and the need for climate justice and equity, in some part of the world, the end users should ask themselves if their current energy consumption is sustainable, is equitable, and if we can define basically a level which is enough, sufficient for well-being, for having a decent life, to enjoy the services we need, but without abusing of this concept and adapting our energy service to this level. And this is basically, in the slide, you see different definitions of sufficiency, but all they converge to this point. And in particular, when we look at the residential sector, at consumer, this very often goes down to either limiting the services, as I say, maybe reducing the cooling, or even reducing the space, as we know that sometimes the space is connected, the size of the building, to the energy consumption in almost a linear manner. In particular, there are situations where this could be applied if there and citizens are willing to do it if there are right policy. For example, elderly, which have a large house, when the children leave the house, but they have difficulty to sell the house, to rent the house, to find a smaller apartment for them, and vice versa. Maybe young families that are looking for a larger house. So maybe some generational policy which allows this swapping of properties. Looking now, sorry, I double click. Looking now at the policy, in my view, the carbon price and carbon tax should become much more prominent in the policy package. It's always a scary word to talk about carbon pricing, in particular because we always see a rebound effect from energy efficiency, and it's a part of the economical way in which efficiency works on energy prices, on putting more money in the pocket of our consumers. I think all the researchers now agree, or the scholar, that there is a rebound effect. Maybe small, 10%, maybe it's high, 60%, but we don't deny it anymore. Yes?
Paolo, sorry, it seems you're stuck in the second slide. We can't see you go through the slides.
Oh, I don't know what is going on here.
Sorry.
Yes. I'm really sorry. So let me try again to share the screen. Okay, if I do my entire screen. Okay, application window. I don't see any more PowerPoint.
Not only do we get to not drink wine with each other, we also have technical problems.
Okay, it's okay now?
I can't see it, sorry. It doesn't actually say that you're sharing your screen yet either.
Okay, let me try.
Okay.
So do you see a slide called carbon pricing?
Yes, we now see a slide on carbon pricing. You may need to move, you may need to click on the slides rather than just on the, for some reason your show isn't playing, your slideshow isn't playing.
Okay. So basically a carbon price is a very big trigger of behavioral change. People, usually citizens, are risk averse, so they don't want to pay more, and they take action to avoid these possible losses. But it's very also difficult to set the level of taxation to trigger this behavior change. It's also very important to look at the distributional impact, in particular for less affluent households, which may have a large impact. They may not be able to pay. It's also very important to look how to use the revenues, in particular for recycling them into an energy efficiency program, in particular for the less affluent household. So to help them with the revenue to become more efficient and so mitigate the impact of the household, of the energy tax. And in the end, if the resulting financial benefit for the country are large enough, maybe there could be also a way maybe to replace tax on labor with the energy tax. So we will pay on what we consume, less what we produce with our labor. Sorry, next slide. Okay, taxes could be also used to promote a good, efficient product, but again, we go away a bit from sufficiency back to efficiency, or we can use the tax to pay for the property. For example, if the property is CO2 footprint or consumption as the energy certificate. And again, the tax very efficient property or property which are do not use much energy, in this case more based on meter data, and tax to the contrary property which have a high consumption. And this brings me to another policy which has been very much investigated about 10 years ago in the UK, but a bit forgotten about because it's complex, but has a lot of possible usage now in a carbon-constrained world, and is the personal carbon allowances. So basically giving to all the citizens a carbon budget for their energy expenditure, being eating, transportation, electricity, and basically if they want to go above their budget, they have to pay. If they want to be saving on their energy consumption, they can eventually sell these additional allowances which they will not use. It's a bit complex, but there is now an experiment in the city of Lati of this instrument, just limited to the transportation, but seems to trigger interest because it will bring to the attention of citizens their CO2 emission, the impact of CO2 emission from their energy consumption, and maybe will make the carbon price more evident for them. Of course, if you are not informed and engaged, it could be just an additional carbon tax on the additional consumption, what you will pay for increase your consumption beyond what is allocated to you. very quickly is then another way to thinking about standards for appliances in buildings. At the moment, they are linear, they are per square meters. So there is no, if you have an efficient buildings, if it's 300 square meters, certainly consume much more than a building less efficient of 100 square meters. So more prominence in information on and of the building consumption, on the total energy consumption, not just the per square meter consumption, and then make it also maybe progressive. So the bigger is the building, the more stringent is the energy efficiency that you have to achieve, so that you are basically forced to do to adopt more technologies. And usually, the larger buildings are also for wealthier people that can afford this technology. Not always, but in many cases. The same also for appliances. If you want a large, you would like to have a large, big car, has to be much more efficient than a smaller car. And this, of course, can also be combined with the taxation that we discussed before. So the last one that I wanted to present to you today is the concept of energy saving feed-in tariff. Again, this was investigated about 10 years ago or 8 years ago by a number of researchers as giving incentive on the safe consumption rather than on the assumption that you invest in a technology which may save energy. As it's done, for example, with white certificate, which very often is ex ante access and behaviour, and then gives you incentive to buy better refrigerator, better boiler or insulator in your house. So here you have basically to prove over a period that you have saved energy, and this saved energy will be rewarded with some kind of additional benefit based on the value of the saved energy for the society, which can be also an implicit carbon price. And again, this could also work with an energy tax, which will even make more interest in the scheme. And as I say, should trigger good behavior by citizens, including sufficiency, because they have a strong incentive to reduce energy consumption rather than improve efficiency. Very quickly, information communication is very important. All this policy needs to be well communicated. You should involve the citizen in co-design this policy to make them understand why they've been adopted, what could be the disparate impact, how it could be minimized, in particular for fuel poor or energy poor households. But at the same time, these policies should be combined with a behavioral change which can be inspired or compounded by good communication. I know there are many experts on this topic, so quickly to the conclusion. So these are some policy which go beyond the concept of promoting energy efficiency and may address conservation and sufficiency. Many of these have not been tested apart from energy carbon taxes, and all of them have pros and cons, which I did not have the time to go very much through them, but they could certainly be considered by policymakers in the range of policies that are needed for the decarbonization of our economy, and in particular our buildings where people live. This is all from my side. Thank you for your attention, and again, apologies for the technical problem with my presentation.
Thank you, Paolo. Grazie mille. That was very good, despite the technical problems. We have a question from Stratos. How do you evaluate the impact of energy supply obligation measures for EU states already applying the approach?
So can you repeat the question? So,
how do you evaluate the impact of energy supplier obligation measures for EU states who are already applying the approach?
Okay, this was not the topic of my presentation because I want to present something different. But in any case, usually member states have a combination of ex ante bottom-up approach, where they estimate the saving from the technologies and then just apply this factor. Or maybe the more accurate method, but more expensive, of doing a before and after measurement and adjustment for some factor that may cause change in efficiency or in consumption, like the changing weather, changing occupancy. So there are very refined techniques to measure the energy saving resulting from energy company obligations.
Mm-hmm. Which policies do you think are most effective to promote sufficiency as opposed to efficiency or conservation?
I think progressive standard most probably could be combined with energy taxation. I'm a strong believer in energy taxation or carbon taxation, but it's a very difficult instrument to implement politically. And so most probably the progressive standards for appliance vehicles and buildings. And I hope that some more jurisdiction test the personal carbon allowance. I mean, with the progress we have in technologies through smartphones, through blockchain, we can really moving away from a concept where emission trading is only at the big power plants and can be translated down to individuals.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think that the hard-to-reach energy users are going to be engaging in those kind of broad national interventions?
Yes, I think the information has to be targeted to them, but also revenue has to be recycled to them. And most probably interventions should be offered to them almost free for charge, in particular for the energy poor household, because there is also many policy always are for the benefit of the more affluent household, where they can invest, they can take benefit because a part of the investment is paid back by some kind of subsidies. And we should turn around and make it the other way, that the energy poor or hard to reach are the first beneficiary of any subsidies that can be generated by revenue created, for example, by carbon tax.
Mm-hmm. To also use progressive taxation then, I assume?
Yes, that's of course very important.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have any questions for Paolo? If not, then Paolo, thank you so much. It was great to see your presentation, and you left your details for anyone, your contact details for anyone who might want to contact you. So unfortunately, we have lost one of our speakers, Steve März. He seems to have not been able to download the right version of Zoom and get into the breakout room. So we're going to move straight to the Nudge project, which is Dr. Stratos Keranidis, the co-founder of DomX, which is an innovative startup developing innovative energy management products. And at DomX, Stratos is in charge of the company's R&D activities towards the development of cost-effective and universal energy management solutions, targeting both end consumers and relevant businesses like suppliers, utilities, maintenance businesses, etc. And he's also the PI of 4 Horizon 2020 research projects in the energy domain called Decide, Nudge, Bright, and Big. I love all the acronyms of the Horizon 2020 stuff. So Stratos, please take it away. Can we see you yet? You may need to start your video.
Hi, Sia, can you hear me? And I'm already
yes,
sharing
we can
my
hear
screen.
you. We can hear you, and we can see you, and we can see your screen. Excellent. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Sia, for the introduction and also for the opportunity to present the Nudge project. So, as already mentioned, Nudge is a Horizon 2020 EU research project. It runs for 3 years. It just started this September, so we are in month 8 of the project. So most of the activities are already ongoing, and we are very happy to present you what we are planning to do. Here we can see an overview of the presentation. I will start with the introduction. As most of the participants know, the holy grail of energy efficiency requires also drastic changes in the way that consumers behave. So we need to understand what are the factors that affect consumer decisions, and in order to help them change, it is important not to employ only monetary or in-kind incentives, as it was being done in the past. But we have understood that it is important to use new type of approaches, like the notion of nudging, as it was introduced by Thaler and Sunshine in 2008, and which acts as the basis of the work proposed in Nudge project. So based on Nudge, we consider any aspect of choice architecture that can change the people's behavior in a way that is predictable and that does not forbid the users any option or the use of economic incentives. So based on this approach, we will try to apply it in the energy domain. For the moment, we consider that behavioral interventions have already been applied, but they have faced significant limitations. Here we briefly mention 5. First of all, that most of the behavioral interventions, they have not been tailored to the specific features of the engaged users. They tend to be behaviorally informed rather than being actually tested in real trials. They don't consider the comparison between nudges and traditional incentives like discounts or economic incentives. And they do not follow a solid methodology for assessing the impact of the trials. And finally, we don't see a clear link between the behavioral interventions and the policy-making actions. So based on the 5 identified limitations, we have defined the project's opportunity and our aim. So Nudge project aspires to assess and unleash the potential of behavioral interventions for higher energy efficiency and deliver them in a generalized toolbox that can be used for the policy making. So the 4 objectives of Nudge project are presented here. First, we aim to design the behavioral interventions that are in a way that they are very targeted to the individual features of the participants. And we plan to do this by employing digital platforms like smartphone applications, metering equipment, control units, collect energy data, and then systematically analyze them. As part of the second objective, we focus on 5 specific field trials that have been designed and selected among many others. And the idea is that we believe that we have identified cases that have the potential to result in significant behavior and energy consumption change. Third, we employ a research methodology that is sufficient to measure the impact of the different interventions, both in the behavior change and the energy consumption change domains. And finally, we aim to consolidate the findings into a policy toolbox that will be made available to policymakers and relevant stakeholders. So what is the consortium of our project? We built a multidisciplinary team of 11 partners, and we feel that we have all the necessary expertise within our team. So we have identified different pillars: the behavior science pillar, the pilot implementation, the policy design, and the consultation and outreach. We can see that we have a very good balance with SMEs and university spread in its different pillars. And what defines the methodology of Nudge? What do we see as, what differentiates our approach? So first of all, we start with the pre-pilot phase, where we are actually running now. So we perform survey-driven user profiling. We try to understand what is the profile of the consumers that we are trying to engage. We design the interventions based on our initial insights. We install energy monitoring and management tools across all the different pilots and deploy digital user interfaces to engage the consumers into the behavior change experiments. And in the phase where the pilots will start to be running, we will employ randomized control trials. So we will select control and intervention groups between the different pilot populations, and we will employ a common type phasing of the interventions. So 3 different phases have been identified, and we will assess the impact of the different nudging interventions across each different phase and compare it between pilots and different types of nudges. And a last very important aspect is that we will employ an automated monitoring procedures to calculate the energy efficiency impact through well-defined pilot KPIs. So this whole procedure, we plan to have it in an automated way. So what are the 5 pilots that we have included? They are deployed in different EU states, namely Greece, Belgium, Germany, Portugal, and Croatia. We consider different environments like residential, energy communities, and schools. We consider multiple age groups, income classes, different energy carriers, and we also include some more high-tech scenarios. The first one that we are, as DomX, in charge of is to test the efficient control of heating and hot water preparation for natural gas boilers in Greece. In Belgium, we'll work on an education program that focuses families with children and the study of energy consumption with their home environment. In Germany, we will work with EV charging scenarios where users will be pushed to consume their self-produced energy from household PVs. In Portugal, we will work with families that face an unhealthy home environment and try to persuade them by targeting both health and energy efficiency improvement in conjunction. And finally, in Croatia, we will promote the distributed self-production through communities of energy consumers. Just to give you some indicative nudges that will be applied per pilot, you can see the nudging categories that we are planning to use. And an example would be for the case of the Greek demonstration. We will offer the ability to all gas consumers that participate in the pilot to compare the consumption of their household with other households in the same neighborhood or city. In the case, let's say, of the EV charging through self-produced energy in Germany, we will try to point out what is the moment that is the most suitable for charging your EV so that you maximize the consumption of self-produced energy. And let's say in the case of Croatia, we will try to provide a comparison across the members of the cooperative so that they can set their own goals and see how much they behave or compare to other members of their community. Just to give you an idea of the expected pilot impact, as we have mentioned, more or less 100 households will participate for each country's demo. So we expect to reach 450 households in total, and reaching more than 1,000 consumers of directly engaged pilot users. And for each case, we will try to implement at least 2 different types of interventions and then gather all the data and try to compare them in total. And there is also a very clear plan for replicating the potential that will come from the 5 different pilot populations. There is a plan to reach more than 15,000 households in the long term, so meaning in 5 years after the project ends. And as we are in the first phase, where we are still analyzing the profile of target consumers, we are welcoming every pilot participant to help us reach a broader audience. So I will paste the link of an ongoing survey just in the tabs, and I welcome everybody to participate. I try to be brief. So in case you have more questions to be addressed, I'm very welcome to reply. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Stratos. Efkaristos. Great job. Sorry, use only one clap from New Zealand that you can hear. But does anyone have any questions for Stratos? We've got 8 minutes. And we unfortunately have lost Stephen März. So Stratos, can you please put that link from the survey into the chat so people can just
yes.
follow it? Yep. And also your email somebody is asking from. And I have a question until somebody else types something, and that's I really like your use of pilots. That's what we want to do as well with our How to Reach Annex. But what else differentiates the Nudge project from similar kind of consumer energy behavior projects?
When we were trying to deceive the idea behind the Nudge project, it was very difficult for us to define a common methodology that could be broadly applied across different pilots. So what we try to do is to define very similar and simple scenarios that can be run across different cases. So the use of digital meters and smartphone applications is something that we consider to be common. So by issuing this type of new technologies in different scenarios, we believe that we have the ability to test a common methodology. We also perform statistical analysis of all collected data, meaning both energy data and consumer behavior data. And also we combine a very nice, combined approach between targeted surveys within larger and smaller populations, and then specifically designed field trials. So we consider that the whole process has a potential to bring new outcomes. So we consider it as a quite different approach compared to what we have studied.
Okay. And somebody asks if you could elaborate, Gilad asks if you could elaborate on the pilot in Croatia.
Sorry, I didn't get it.
If you could elaborate on the pilot in Croatia.
Yes. So for Croatia, we consider an energy community that includes members that have already installed or are planning to install PVs at their own households. So the idea is that they produce their own energy and they can see how the rest members of the community behave. What is the amount of energy consumed and produced per member? So that we try to focus specifically on the social influence part.
Mm-hmm. And Daniel asks what some of the different media are that you're using to provoke responsibility and invoke reciprocity. Is it texts, alerts, emails, home visits, anything else?
Mm-hmm. We will do some pilot level workshops by engaging a small amount of pilot participants. So this will be the most focused type of interaction. Apart of this, we will push specific messages through push notifications through the smartphone applications. This will happen on demand just with the pilot users again. But regarding more public reach media, we are following a very, broad dissemination approach with newsletters, public presentations, videos, and ideas to reach more consumers in a public way. This is also a part of the survey that we presented here. Mm-hmm. And at national level, we have specified meetings with representatives of local authorities, energy suppliers, technical companies, and such things. So we have an approach that will run on a national, EU level, or even local level.
Mm-hmm. And Paolo is asking if you're only focusing on nudges to change behavior, or if you're also looking at traditional smart meter and display feedback mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Paolo, as we said, we will try to push nudging mechanism through the smartphone applications, but all type of metering data will be collected through smart meters. So this will be both for visualization purposes to help the users get the message of how well they perform, but it will be also the basis for our post-processing of the efficiency and energy consumption impact. So we will use traditional smart meters as well, but for the display feedback mechanism, as we mentioned here, it will be just done through the smartphone application and the web dashboards.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I just wonder what the project progress is so far in terms of user engagement, or what level of feedback you've collected from the users.
Yes, it's different. Pilot has a different background. So in our case, we already had a large population of consumers. We just had we just needed to contact them and ask them to join the pilot. So we are progressing very well. The number of 100 users will be soon reached. For other cases, there are new pilots, so they are currently ongoing. They are currently working on the user engagement part. So we are not fully in line, but expect to be ready by September or October. So before the actual heating season starts.
Mm-hmm. Well, good luck with your project. One more question very quickly. What tools did you use to involve people in your pilot project, and how did you motivate them?
Yes. First of all, the idea is that they get access to new features that are not available to regular customers or consumers. They have the option to participate in workshops and offer their opinion or participate in the surveys. And another very important part is that most of them have the ability to get low-cost solutions to improve their home consumption. And in some cases, it is also offered at no cost. So we try to offer different ways of motivation for end users.
Okay. Thank you so much, Stratos, and thank you everyone so much for joining our Hard to Reach Energy Users session. We will start at 1 o'clock Central European time again, and I really enjoyed moderating this session. And as I said, if you want to hear more about the Hard to Reach, please join us either tomorrow at the ENR session 4B or Friday at the session 8B. And have a good evening, everyone, from New Zealand.